That's when everything got really bad. So the client, asked me to come into the office, and they basically kind of blindsided me, and they just belittled me for like an hour straight, right? About how bad of a recruiter I was and, everything, right? At the time, I thought, yeah, this is fine. But I didn't expect it, right? And then I realized that later that really started to eat into me, that like
Mm.
I didn't say anything. I just shut up and took it, which was probably the best thing at the time to do. But then as I was getting, chewed out, I started to think like, okay, how am I going to get out of this mess, right? Other than getting up and walking out.
Welcome to another episode of Tokyo Recruiters. I'm Levi. Thanks for being here. As you can see, my guest today, Brad Corbet, got himself into a difficult situation, getting yelled at by a client for a retained search. In this podcast, he talks about how he got into that situation, how he got out of that situation, as well as the ups and downs going inside and outside of recruitment for a few years. So in this episode, we've exchanged some stories about the real side of recruitment and what are the things that people are facing. How can you develop thick skin, and why is it so necessary to do so in this industry? I don't know if this is Japan specific, but I hope that this information is valuable to you as you start your recruitment journey. Welcome to the podcast, Brad. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming.
Thanks for having. It's always good to chat with you again.
Yeah, I wanted to flip the table a little bit after your last one. I got quite a few leads actually coming out of that, so it was really effective.
Transparency is really good, and I think a lot of your content that you had was quite genuine, right? That people appreciated, so that's good.
Yeah, I try. And when we first met in Tokyo Station, I remember you were telling me, revealing all these stories of recruitment in Tokyo. So I'm excited to hear maybe some new ones as well, and to share this with the audience. So I guess just getting started, could you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you into recruitment in the first place?
Yep, I'll try and make it as short as possible. My resume is about 14 pages long, so it's kind of hard to condense that. But no, initially, I came over with the military, right? So I didn't come to Japan by choice. A lot of people, kind of came here as tourists or something like that and ended up. But yeah, basically, I dropped out of college, I joined the military, and then, 8 weeks later, they said, go to Japan. And that's where I went. So I ended up in Japan in Yokosuka and at Sugi. I did 7 years here in Japan, luckily. And yeah, I had the opportunity to go back and I didn't. So I decided to stay. And yeah, the only job I could get out of the military, I was a cook in the military, and the only job I could get was teaching English. So that's what I did initially. But yeah, that's what brought me here initially.
Wow. So you were a cook when you came, and for the 7 years you were cooking.
Yeah, I mean, I was labeled as a cook. They call a mess specialist, which I guess still to this day, I can create a mess. But yeah, I was cooking. I cooked eggs for a year, and then I got promoted to salads. And then I think one of the cushiest gigs I had when I left was I put in a request to cook in the captain's kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I got it, and I was basically the gopher for the captain. I did very little cooking. It was more like picking up his cleaning, getting his cigarettes, serving meals, and those kind of things. But yeah, that was a wild time, and probably one of the most challenging jobs I had when I was 20 nothing.
Interesting. So from basically taking care of the captain of a military vessel to taking care of little children in a classroom.
Well, luckily I didn't teach kids. Yeah, that would have killed me.
Okay.
But yeah, I was more like on the English teaching side, adults, business, things. Yeah, that's kind of what transitioned eventually into HR, right? So, I'd done teaching and then kind of transitioned. I became trainers and managers, right? And then that's when, I think the HR training aspect of my career started to trickle in. So, I was in education for probably 10 years, and then close to 10 years, and in different capacities, basically teaching, training, managing. And then I think my last gig was I was an internal recruiter for an education company. So
you actually started in internal recruitment, and then went to the agency side?
Yes and no, right? So I wasn't teaching, and then I took a deep dive and decided to work for, a recruiting company. I think I told you in our story, I worked for East West. That was my first experience getting into recruiting. And yeah, that was in a very crazy time in Japan and just in the recruitment industry in general. It was probably one of my best and worst experiences there. So, but yeah, I did it for a year and somehow I survived, but I actually hated it.
Mm.
Similar to maybe your initial parts of recruiting. And then that's when I, kind of took a step back and just went internal recruiting for an education thing. So I kind of went back to something I kind of knew. And that's when, it started to come back to me. So
How old were you when you started at East West?
yikes, that must have been that was like early 2000s, right? So yeah, about
So late
probably
20s?
late. No, I'm 54. So yeah, that was, I'm trying to do the math, but yeah, that was back, probably 30 something. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just thought it'd be interesting to know that, because a lot of people are coming, straight out of English teaching when they're 24 or 25, but you were someone maybe who started a little bit later. So at least at that time, it sounded like there was a good chance to get into the industry.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, it was pretty much they would just take anyone, right? And then it's sink or swim, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I still appreciate that opportunity to be in such a high pressure environment. And I don't think, I mean, it has changed a lot, right? I think it's watered down quite a bit, which is a good thing. But I don't think, having pressure is good. If it eats away at your soul and, it's a toxic environment, that's a bit different, then you should step away. Yeah, if it's a positive pressure or more pressure from yourself to deliver, I think that's a healthy environment to be in, right? So, but I had a bit of both. It was a toxic environment and yeah, I didn't see a lot of merit in sticking around at that time. Yeah,
So I want to get into, a challenge that you had overcome. I don't know if it was at East West or if it was later in your career, but
no, I mean, actually overcoming that challenge was easy. I just quit, right? So that was an easy way out. So I wouldn't say that was very challenging, but no, I mean, yeah, when you, that kind of piqued my interest. I mean, I would consider myself quite resilient. I don't worry about too many things. I don't get too stressed about things. But yeah, I think the hardest thing that I came across when I was a recruiter was when I was working with a client and I was working on a retained client, and they had high expectations and those kind of things, but I was very transparent with what I was delivering. And we got into the contract, they signed off, we got a retainer, it was all good. And I started diving into the search and everything like that. And then about midway through, they were quite picky, which is fine. But then it got to a point where it just got really nasty, right? And then I had actually sent through a candidate that went all the way to the final interview stage. And the candidate contacted me and he said like, yeah, I went to the final interview and, everything was all good. But they're not going to actually offer me a position unless I give them all of my clients. And I was like, yeah, okay, that's just wrong, right? You can't just blackmail somebody into that, right? Not only that, I mean, it's a conflict of interest and ethics and everything, right? So I was just kind of went ballistic, right? And I didn't contact at the time I didn't contact the client, and I said, well, it's up to you. You should either just decline the offer, and then I can talk to them after that. But I left it up to the candidate, and ultimately he declined. But then, yeah, that's when everything got really bad. So the client, asked me to come into the office, and they basically kind of blindsided me, and they just belittled me for like an hour straight, right? About how bad of a recruiter I was and, everything, right? And it was just like, at the time I thought, yeah, this is fine. But I didn't expect it, right? And then I realized that later that really started to eat into me, that like, I didn't say anything. I just shut up and took it, which was probably the best thing at the time to do. But then as I was getting, chewed out, I started to think like, okay, how am I going to get out of this mess, right? Other than getting up and walking out. And then I started to realize, well, wait a minute, I didn't do anything wrong here, right? And then I was like, they were like, blah, 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 they stopped. And then they finally let me speak, right, after, an hour. And the only thing I could come up with was, I said, if the candidate was so bad that I sent through, why'd you make an offer? And then, yeah, go ahead.
So just to clarify, so they were upset because they didn't close the candidate?
No, they were upset because they just thought my whole search and everything was bad. Like I wasn't sending them good candidates, you looked at our specs, right? And then I was starting to listen. I was like, well, that's...
Someone went to final stage and they offered someone.
Exactly, right? So if I was so bad, how did this guy get to offer stage, right? And that's what I asked him, right? I was like, if all these candidates were so bad, how did this guy get to offer stage, right? And he's like,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I just remember, is this for a rec-to-rec search? Are these recruiters that are talking to you? Or?
Yeah, this was a rec-to-rec one, right? So we did a retain one, rec-to-rec, right?
So these are recruiters that are belittling you and saying that you're a bad recruiter.
Yep.
And you didn't introduce any good recruiters, but we still offered someone. And
yep.
Okay. How'd you get out of this? Yeah.
I mean, it was just the one line, basically, like, if I was so bad, why did you make an offer? And their response was, because we were desperate. And I was like, fair enough, not my problem, right? Yeah, you were desperate, so you reached out to me, and I delivered, and yet you're here still,
This is probably something they do to their clients all the time, right?
I hope not, right? I mean, and, that's fine. I mean, it's all a grain of salt, but, like, I did realize, like, that afterwards, like, it did... you kind of lose sleep and it's not fun. And I really thought I was above it, but it did start to eat away at me, right? Like, I couldn't sleep well. And I don't know why that was, right? Because in general, like, okay, these guys are just assholes and, you just kind of move on with it. But yeah, that was, for me, that was the first time that I actually, somebody tapped through and got in, right? And that was, not a fun experience, but yeah, you just have to see, like, what, I took the high road and I didn't do anything that was, you just didn't deliver what they expected. And you know what, that's just part of the industry,
So what happened?
So for me, that was the only time I actually, quote unquote, had to have a refund. I've never actually had to refund anything except that particular client. And yeah, I mean, it's a learning experience, right? I mean, a lot of times you think, something's not going to affect you, but it does, indirectly. Yeah, for me, it was a good experience to just get back to, not letting things get to you that much, right? Because it's just everything is so trivial, right? So
for sure, yeah. I mean, it sucks that happened, and I think unfortunately it probably does happen even now in the industry, but hopefully it's getting less and less, and with it kind of being brought to light more and people sharing these stories, that hopefully this goes away.
Yeah, I mean, it can happen, I think, anyway. I mean, I see it happening sometimes with, not from a client, but just internally, right? Your boss or a colleague is digging at you, right? And yeah, you really do have to take the high road. I mean, the worst thing to do is shove it back or ignore it, which is even worse, right? I mean, you definitely have to address it, but you have to do it in a positive way, right? Which is not always easy, right? I mean, the easiest way is just to go off, but might feel good, but it might have repercussions.
For sure, can definitely have repercussions. I don't know. It's sad that probably these people are getting mistreated by their clients or were at some point, or by their manager, and then they're kind of pushing that down the line. So
it could be, right? It's always stress is a trickle down effect, right? So
yeah. But so with all of this being said, would you still recommend recruitment as a career to people, or what is your thought on that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's probably, every industry has its, challenges and everything like that. But I mean, yeah, recruiting I've had no bad, even that experience. I would say that's just comes with the territory, right? And it's a learning experience, right? And you gotta take it. I mean, the worst thing is, and I have seen this with some people, is that, that happens to them and then they want to get out of the industry altogether, right? Which is, that's unfortunate, right? Because some people are worth staying in the industry, but yeah, Like if you have one bad experience and you get knocked down, yeah, I mean that's what I like about recruiting is it's never not challenging, right?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have that thick skin and you have to know that that thick skin is not thick enough. So you're gonna have to get thicker skin when
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
gets through eventually. I had similar experiences. I remember the CEO of my old company was saying, the number one thing I need from you as you're starting is to have thick skin. And, I thought, oh, I can do that. And there was times when I was, threatened with physical violence or, threatened or psychologically kind of put down or even yelled at in the middle of the office. And, looking back, that's not the environment that I would choose for myself now. But I'm kind of glad that I got to see that that exists. And you kind of learn, it's kind of like hanmen kyoshi, right? Like the
Yeah.
learning from the wrong way to do things, maybe. And in some ways, that hard line discipline, which you probably saw in the military, it does give you some, some structure. As messed up as it might be, you're going to fall in line, when someone says these things, or you're going to break. And it's just, like you said, I think it's important not to break, just to be able to pick yourself up, take the high road, and not let that get passed down, not let that stress trickle down from you to the people that you're managing. And that's really the hard part, I think, is to not continue that cycle and to break it. But I think it's possible.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, it is. It takes time to get up to that. I mean, I don't know how I would, if I was 20 something now in that kind of environment, I don't know, if I would react the same way or manage it the same way. But yeah, I mean, in any of my jobs that I've had that it's been difficult, right? I mean, to me, it's very simple. You just have to look at the person themselves, right? Like, and like you said, you have to be a little more psychological about it, right? Like if those guys are really being a-holes or whatever, there's a reason behind it, right? Either they're not overly happy in their situation or that's happening to them. Right. To me, those are the only two scenarios where somebody acts like that. Right.
Mm,
And,
for sure.
you have to realize that. Right. You don't have to empathize with it. No, if that's happening to them and they're being that way to another person, then they're in the wrong. And, you don't really have to empathize that. But you do have to read the situation better to where like that shouldn't affect you. Right. Because if you say like, okay, this person is just blatantly targeting me because I'm stupid or bad or I failed or whatever, then, it's the sticks and stones type scenario, right? Where you don't take anything personally.
I think that's really the antidote right there.
And you've got to realize that it's a human on the other side. They're no better than you as a person, regardless of title, salary, experience or anything like that, right? So it's just a common decency. If somebody's going to, I don't care who they are. I don't care if it's the CEO of a company or something like that, and it's a potential client and you need to close this deal. But if they're just don't have the manners or the demeanor, to act professionally, then, F them, right? I mean, and you can just walk away and just say, no, I don't want to work with you,
Yeah.
or I don't want to listen to you, even if it's a client right now. You don't have to take that just because they're a client or something like that, or they're your friend or spouse or anything, right? I mean, I don't see any situation where you can't get out of that, right? I think it's just a mindset thing, right?
Yeah, I guess setting those boundaries for yourself and then also explaining those is probably a good thing to do. And just for yourself, not taking it personally. I think that's really a key thing is kind of putting yourself in their shoes. The hardest thing though is when you're like, I would never do this. I would never treat someone below me. I'd never exercise my power like this. Or even if they're not below you, you would never yell at someone in this way for something so silly. And it brings me back a little bit to one of the times that kind of broke me as well when I was leaving the industry. Right when I was getting ready to go, I had a big role and I was introducing to different candidates out there. And there was a candidate that I had been working with for, the whole 5 years I was there. We had met for coffees and, had calls quarterly. I thought, oh, we've kept in touch and we have a good relationship. And then I give them all this information about this senior position. And of course they betray, they backstab me and they end up giving that information and taking it direct. And that basically totally shocked me, because I was like, why would you do this? But you have to understand that for whatever reason, they're thinking that it's in their best interest to do that, and you can't take it personally. You just have to be like, well, I learned my lesson. I'm not going to share confidential information with you anymore moving forward. I'm going to treat you as a candidate that's going to receive normal information, or we're going to cut you out completely and not send you anything. But you have to have that boundary of, this is what we're going to do moving forward, and explain that. And again, not take it personally. It's just business, right? You've shown your true colors, and it's not have anything to do with me. So
Yeah, definitely. And I think at any age, you have to have a stance, right? I mean, you can't, it's okay to tell a candidate or a client or somebody or a boss or supervisor that they're wrong, or that it's, if it's just out of spite or because you don't like them, that's not the way to do it. I mean, it's like, fundamentally, if you think you're right and you are right, you should stand your ground, right? And then that will make your skin thicker, right? In the better way, right? I mean, if you just react negatively, or you start doing that, then that's, you're in the wrong, right? But I mean, if you really take a step back and say, like, you know what, actually, I'm right, right? And fundamentally, you believe you're right, you got to stand your ground. And no one's, even if you get fired for that, it's better to get fired for being right than for being wrong, right?
Yeah, I don't see it as right and wrong so much. Like I I have trouble using that terminology, because
Right.
I feel like what's right for me might not be what's right for you, right? I look at my colleagues coming after me, and with my manager, I pushed back plenty on I was telling him, this is not how you should manage people, and I was saying it more generally, like, I'm right, this is not how you should manage people. Really, what I should have said is, this isn't how I want to be managed. This is not right for me. Because later on, he did end up changing his style slightly over the 5 years, and it was really impressive, actually, to see him change after pushing back so many times. And I would recommend that to people, to push back and do that. But then people join the company that fit with his original style of, I'm going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to explain why you have to do it. And you just follow orders and do it. And that worked. That worked for those people that came and joined the company. It didn't work for me. And I needed the explanation of the why. But yeah, pushing back and not being afraid, even if you're a new joiner, this doesn't work for me. I'd like it this way. It's their choice then. Are they going to change or not? And if they don't change, maybe you do need to leave and join somewhere, a different company that fits you and is right for you. But that's my thought on it.
No, definitely. And I mean, in the position that I'm now, I'm managing people, right? And you have to, especially when they're salespeople or something like that, you have to, if it's a revenue driving, environment, yeah, like some people, like you said, like they respond well to do it this way, and they need constant, attention to direction and those things. And then other ones, they just want to be left alone, and they need to be on their own. But, at the end, everyone has to be accountable, right? So either, your direction has to be good, or if they're going to come up with their own channels, they have to be accountable for the end result, right? So
yeah, you might have to adjust, in the same call. I'm sure you have to do this. You're telling directions to 3 different staff, and you have to tell it 3 different ways.
Yeah,
so
I mean, before, like, I thought, like, okay, there's only one way to do this, and, this is the way it is. But it's not that simple, to be honest. I think you do have to, yeah, I mean, as a standard, you have to kind of have standards, but each individual person is obviously going to operate very differently, right? Especially in recruiting or a sales type environment, right? So not everyone's going to be able to, fit the mold of the thing, but they can still produce results. But if somebody wants to do it their own crazy way, that's fine, but they have to be accountable at some, at the end of that, right? So
yeah, some people just want to be told, here's the end goal, go accomplish this mission, and it doesn't matter how you do it. And other people are like, I need to know, I don't care about the end goal, just tell me the process of what I need to do along the way and everything in between, I guess.
Well, and that's one thing, maybe you'll segue into it, but like, when you're considering, even if you're a new person getting into recruiting or you're a veteran recruiter, right? It's just super important to know how you want to be managed and how you work
Mm-hmm.
in order to choose the right environment for the next kind of position, right? Or the first position in that
Yeah.
case, right? It's not all about like hiring me and going, jumping through the hoops for the interviews, right? It's more like
Yeah.
if that place is not right for you, then that place has to be right for you, not the other way around. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people just fall into
Kind
that,
of
like,
interview
oh,
that.
okay, I'm in the second interview now that I'm going to the third interview, they really like me. It shouldn't be that. It should be like, they're in the
You're
second interview
interviewing
with
them.
me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, it's hard to, actually do that because, you might be in a not desperate situation. It's never good to look for a job if you're desperate, right? But
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people feel that, it's the interviewer to the interviewee type scenario, right?
Yeah.
And I think especially in these days, that's not the case. And you shouldn't label yourself as a candidate or an interview.
Yeah. Yeah, it depends. I think also, like, if you've applied to 10 recruitment companies and gotten rejected instantly from them, maybe you do need to take whatever you can get and move on from there. But
Right.
if you really want to be in the industry, but if you have the luxury of getting interviews and going forward, like, I remember doing this exact thing and it worked really well. I was applying for N-World and I was just interviewing them. I was just asking them question after question after question. And I remember it was for an HR area position and they were not asking me anything. And I was like, this is great. I don't have to talk about all the experience I don't have. I can just, ask them questions and this is the job. You're showing them that you're a recruiter because you're asking more about what are their needs and what is the team like, what is the culture like. They love to see that. So it's better than selling yourself. It's better than just talking about how great you are because they don't care. It's if you actually show them you can be a recruiter by interviewing them, then you have the leverage and you also are showing them that you can do the job. So I think that's brilliant.
Definitely. I mean, with recruiting, it's more really about mindset and kind of the energy and drive. You have to show all of those in general. I mean, in any interview that you have, but yeah, you can find out and probe good questions. I think most candidates don't ask enough good questions,
Mm,
about the organization or about like what the
yeah.
job is or, the expectations, those kind of things.
I'm curious, like any specifics, like is there something that you would recommend people to ask or, to really understand what that firm is like and whether that fits them? How can they tell?
Well, like, I mean, I was looking at that before, like, especially people coming in, right? They said, if you are money motivated and you really, that's on your mind, that you're probably going to be a good recruiter, right?
Mm,
I think if somebody goes into an interview like that, then they should be asking the organization, like, okay, I want to make $150,000 over the next year. One, is that possible? And in your organization, how do I do that? Right? So start from your goal backwards, right? And if they have a hard time explaining or, oh, well, our commission structure is this, and if it takes more than about a minute to explain that, it's going to be complicated, right? So with the commission structures and all that kind of stuff, like I think new people coming in don't really understand, what commission structures are and those kind of things, right? But it's really like, okay, why do you want to get into recruiting? And if you do want to make money, put a number on it. How much money do you expect to make in your first year or second year? And how do I do that? Right? Because that's the hardest question is, in your organization, how can I do that?
Yeah.
If they give you a good answer, maybe that's a good first step. That organization maybe is a good place to start because they're going to nurture you.
I mean, that's a great question to ask because it's showing that you are money driven, but it's not just saying like, oh, I want to make money. You're also goal driven. You've actually thought it through about, I want this much money. Right. And that's a great thing to show probably these recruitment companies. I think the good ones will like to see that. They'll like to see that. My company would, at the time that I joined it, they had it was discretionary 100%. And there was no way they could have explained what the commission scheme looked like at all. I still joined knowing that.
Right.
because I just trusted them. And I did make good money there. And also it did change and become more transparent. But I didn't mind, honestly, at the start of it. It wasn't a huge thing for me, but
Yeah, I mean, and coming into it, you have to understand, like, usually you're not going to make any money. You're going to make your base salary in the first year.
yeah.
And then after that, then it's a little more positive. So, right, it is the other things like they offer, like the environment, the people, the structure, right? So if they're going to get that coming for new people getting into it, that's also super important, like the people you're going to work with and those kind of things. But yeah, I'd say it's more important for, senior or experienced recruiters that, okay, so I build, like in your case, okay, I build 1 million yen at my last agency. So can I do that in yours? Or what is it going to take to do that in yours or something like that, right? Because I think that's what the struggle for, I think, experienced recruiters is that the potential agency is basing them on their last billing or most recent ones. I build 30 million here, I build 50 million here, but that was in that environment, right?
Yeah.
So experienced recruiters have to be even tougher on the potential company joining, right? Of like, I did this in this environment and this is why it worked. Right? Is that going to be the same in your case, or those kind of things, right? So I think they need to really, because at the senior level, it's more about being able to stay at the same amount that they were making before, but make even more plus alpha, right? Like more, a bigger responsibility or more autonomy or something. Right?
Yeah, and it would become hard also if your past numbers are not so impressive and you have to sell yourself to another recruitment company and say, hey, actually it was the environment, this wasn't right for me. How do you show that? How do you even prove to them? They're not going to believe it if you just are saying that.
Well, I mean, I have come across candidates that, they had some bad years, right? And as a potential hiring manager, they're going to ask like, okay, these are just excuses. Right.
And maybe even negative, right?
Yep. It's going to look negative, right? So you really have to do a bit of both. Like, okay, that I screwed up here or this didn't work, but you can't sound like it's going to be excuses. Ultimately, you're accountable for your numbers. And if the numbers are low, unfortunately, it just is what it is, right? So instead, I think that conversation should shift to like, this is what I should have done differently, right? That's going to buy you maybe some points. Of like, yep, you know what? I screwed up on those 3 quarters because of this. If you can identify what really was wrong, if you only put it on the organization, then that's not good, right? You got to put a bit on yourself. But if you do take that burden and say like, look, this is what I should have done differently. I probably should have done this, or then suddenly, I think they're gonna be a little more open to consider you, right? Because that's what I see, like with potential agencies that are looking for senior level people, right? They want to know what you're going to bring to the organization. And they shouldn't base it based on past billings or even potential billings, right? It's more about what works or how they analyze themselves and how they analyze the market. I think that's a better approach for experienced recruiters that are trying to sell themselves.
Yeah, I guess it's a tough situation to be in, to have to sell yourself when you're not doing so well and when you feel like the environment is not right, because you don't want to stay any longer and you don't feel like you can bill anymore. But I guess at the end of the day, it's really about taking that ownership and just doing what it takes. And, if you really have to leave, I think identifying maybe whether it was a problem of micromanagement or macromanagement, like explaining that you want to be in an environment where you have more hands-on direction. And there's places out there that are going to want to give that to you. There's places that are like very structured, very rigid, and they're like, follow exactly what I say to do and you'll be good. And if you're that person, you'll probably thrive there. But maybe you were the person who was too micromanaged and you feel like you want more freedom to do what you can do. And there's places, again, that you can thrive where you are with a hands-off manager or no manager at all. So maybe like that is also a core piece. And I'm sure there's other things that you could mention about, things that would work better for you. If you can first identify how you want to be managed and then express that and find companies that will do that for you. So and I like how that all kind of tied in as well. So very cool. We're kind of wrapping towards the end of the session. So I do want to just ask if there's any, I guess, thing else that you wanted to share about what you're doing now, or about advice for young recruiters, or anything at all.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, like, yeah, I mean, recruiting is still a great industry to be in. If you're a new recruiter coming in, it's really a good place to start. But, there are a lot of people, I think now more often than before, of like, you can seek advice like from yourself or other people in the industry about like what makes sense. So I think those options are there for both, junior, new people coming into recruiting as well as senior recruiters as well.
Nice. So basically seek help if you're
Yeah, don't be afraid to reach out if you don't know, right? I mean, either to rec recruiters or just colleagues or somebody in the industry that knows, or even potential companies that you'd be interested to join or agencies that you'd be interested to join, right? It's a lot easier to pass an interview over coffee when you're not in an interview situation than it is to actually apply officially through a channel, right? So no recruiter is going to say no to coffee if you're interested in joining them, right?
Yeah.
That's the best way to have a conversation and kind of gauge maybe the place that you want to be, right? But yeah, it's surprising that people just don't do that in our industry still, right?
Yeah, I don't know why. It doesn't make sense, but the smart people do it. The people that are looking around and just building relationships, that's the job. So if you really believe in that, then why not have some contacts that you can get a coffee with if the worst case scenario happens at your company and you have a place to go, or maybe you just end up leaving.
It gives you
anyway.
options.
So options are always good. Nice. Thank you for sharing this. Anything else?
No, that's all good. Thanks for having it. Good luck with the platform. It's great. You've interviewed some great people. So I look forward to seeing the content.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
And enjoy the rest of your time in Hawaii.
Will do. Nice. Thanks, Brad.